Welcome to the discussion. Today we're exploring the fascinating intersection of exercise science, biomechanics, and artificial intelligence. We'll delve into three research papers, one examining how exercise builds muscle at a molecular level, another focusing on using smartphone sensors to track strength training, and a third detailing an AI approach to automatically measure muscle volume from MRI scans. What are some of the key questions that these papers address?
These papers tackle fundamental questions about muscle growth and measurement. The first paper investigates the mechanisms behind muscle hypertrophy, exploring how muscles sense and respond to mechanical load. The second paper focuses on the practical application of readily available technology smartphones to monitor exercise, specifically strength training. The third paper addresses the challenge of efficiently and accurately quantifying muscle volume, a crucial biomarker in sports medicine and beyond, using AI-powered image analysis.
Let's start with the first paper, Why Exercise Builds Muscles. Titan mechanosensing controls skeletal muscle growth under load. It's quite technical. Can you explain the core concept in a way that's easy to understand?
Imagine your muscles as tiny engines. When you exercise, these engines work harder, creating internal stress. This paper focuses on a protein called titin, a giant molecule within muscle cells that acts like a sensor. It detects this internal stress and triggers a signaling cascade that leads to muscle growth, hypertrophy. The researchers built a mathematical model to describe this process, showing how different types of exercise, high intensity versus endurance, lead to different growth responses.
So Titan is essentially a mechanical sensor within the muscle. How does it work and why is this important?
Exactly. Titan senses the force applied to the muscle. When under load, it changes shape, triggering a series of biochemical reactions. This is crucial because it explains how muscles know they're being exercised and adapt accordingly. The model helps predict muscle growth or loss, atrophy, based on different training regimes.
The second paper, Sensor-based data acquisition via ubiquitous device to detect muscle strength training activities, takes a different approach. It uses smartphone sensors to track strength training exercises. How does this work and what are the advantages?
This research uses the built-in sensors in smartphones and smartwatches to recognize different strength training movements. The researchers developed an app that collects data from these sensors, accelerometers, gyroscopes, etc., and uses machine learning, specifically an LSTM algorithm, to identify the type of exercise being performed. The advantage is that it's a convenient and accessible way to monitor exercise, especially in places where specialized equipment might not be available.
That sounds incredibly practical. What kind of data did they collect and how accurate was their system?
They collected data from 25 participants performing 9 different strength training exercises. The machine learning model achieved high accuracy, around 98%, suggesting that smartphone sensors can effectively track these movements. The study also identified which sensor data was most important for accurate recognition.
The third paper, Muscle Volume Quantification, Guiding Transformers with Anatomical Priors, uses AI to analyze MRI scans to measure muscle volume. Why is this important and how does it work?
Accurately measuring muscle volume is crucial for monitoring muscle growth, assessing injuries, and tracking the progression of muscle diseases. Manual segmentation of muscles from MRI scans is extremely time-consuming. This paper presents an automated method using a deep learning model, a hybrid convolutional neural network and transformer architecture, to segment muscles from 3D MRI images.
Transformers are usually used in natural language processing. Why are they useful for image segmentation here?
Transformers excel at capturing long-range dependencies, which is important because muscles are interconnected. The model uses a transformer to understand the relationships between different muscles, improving segmentation accuracy. They also incorporated anatomical prior knowledge into the model, further enhancing performance.
What kind of anatomical prior knowledge did they use?
They used an adjacency matrix, which represents the probability of two muscles being adjacent to each other based on anatomical knowledge. This constraint helps the model produce more realistic and anatomically plausible segmentations.
How did the AI model perform compared to manual segmentation?
The AI model achieved high accuracy, with volumetric errors generally below 10% on a test set of elite athletes. This is a significant improvement over manual segmentation, which is both time-consuming and prone to human error. The inclusion of anatomical priors further improved the results.
So these three papers offer complementary perspectives on understanding and measuring muscle growth. The first provides a mechanistic understanding at the molecular level. The second offers a practical method for tracking exercise using readily available technology. And the third provides an efficient AI-powered method for quantifying muscle volume. What are the limitations of each approach, and how might they be improved?
The first paper's model is simplified and doesn't account for all the complexities of muscle growth. The second paper's accuracy could be improved with more data and more diverse participants. The third paper's performance is limited by the size of the training dataset. Future work could focus on expanding these datasets, incorporating more sophisticated models, and exploring the integration of these different approaches.
The first paper's model is quite complex. Could you elaborate on the role of ATP and the nonlinear dependence of protein synthesis rates on muscle fiber size?
The model incorporates ATP, the body's energy currency, because muscle contraction and protein synthesis require energy. The nonlinear dependence of protein synthesis on muscle fiber size reflects the fact that larger muscle fibers have more steric hindrance, making it harder for ribosomes, the protein synthesis machinery, to move efficiently.
The second paper mentions using a filtering method based on Pearson correlation for feature selection. What's the advantage of this approach?
Pearson correlation helps identify the sensor data that is most strongly correlated with the type of exercise being performed. This allows the researchers to select the most informative features for their machine learning model, improving efficiency and accuracy. It's a common and effective technique for dimensionality reduction.
The third paper mentions using a soft dice cross-entropy loss function. Why is this a good choice for this type of problem?
The soft dice loss is particularly well suited for medical image segmentation because it addresses class imbalance, where some muscle classes might be much smaller than others, and provides a smooth, differentiable loss function suitable for training deep learning models. Combining it with cross-entropy further improves performance.
The third paper also highlights the importance of post-processing the model's output. What kind of post-processing steps were used, and why are they necessary?
Post-processing steps like identifying the largest connected component and filling holes are crucial because the raw output of the segmentation model might contain small, isolated regions of incorrect predictions. These steps help clean up the segmentation, improving the accuracy of the final muscle volume measurements. All three papers highlight the importance of large, high-quality data sets for training accurate models. What are the challenges in acquiring such data sets, particularly in the context of elite athletes?
Acquiring datasets of elite athletes is challenging due to the time and resources required for data collection, the need for specialized equipment, like MRI scanners, and the ethical considerations involved in working with human subjects. Furthermore, manual annotation of these datasets is extremely time-consuming and requires specialized expertise.
The first paper discusses the concept of mechanosensing of the second kind. Can you explain this concept and its relevance to muscle growth?
Mechanosensing of the second kind refers to sensors that integrate mechanical signals over time rather than responding instantaneously. This is important because muscle growth is a process that occurs over days or weeks, not milliseconds. Titan, as a mechanosensor of the second kind, allows the muscle to integrate the mechanical load experienced during exercise, leading to a sustained growth response. The second paper focuses on upper limb movements. Why was this choice made, and what are the implications for future research?
Focusing on upper limb movements simplifies the data collection and analysis. Future research could expand to include lower limb movements and more complex exercises, potentially requiring more sophisticated sensor fusion techniques and machine learning models.
The third paper uses a hybrid architecture combining CNNs and transformers. What are the advantages of this approach compared to using only CNNs or only transformers?
CNNs are good at capturing local features, while transformers are better at capturing long-range dependencies. Combining them allows the model to leverage the strengths of both architectures, leading to improved segmentation accuracy. This hybrid approach is becoming increasingly popular in medical image analysis.
All three papers suggest avenues for future research. What are some of the most promising directions?
Future research could focus on developing more sophisticated models, expanding data sets, exploring different sensor fusion techniques, investigating the integration of these different approaches, and applying these methods to study muscle diseases. Understanding the interplay between molecular mechanisms, exercise monitoring, and AI-powered image analysis will be crucial for advancing our understanding of muscle growth and health.
Thank you for this insightful discussion. It's clear that understanding and measuring muscle growth is a complex but increasingly tractable problem, thanks to advances in both exercise science and AI.
All right, you ready for this? You wanted the inside scoop on the recent Supreme Court rulings on Title IX, right? Specifically, the Department of Education's new regulations. Well, buckle up,
Yeah.
because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
Yeah.
It all started when the Department of Education decided to, well,
Yeah, they really shook things up.
they did.
They issued new regulations that actually expanded the very definition of sex discrimination.
Whoa.
We're talking about including discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Huge.
A huge change, yep, with big implications for schools all across the country.
Okay, so break it down for me. Like, what exactly is Title IX? I know it's a big deal, but just
Right.
remind me.
Yeah, no, Title IX is it's a landmark law
Okay.
that basically says schools can't discriminate based on sex if they want to get federal funding.
Right?
You can think of it like a giant lever for equality in education.
Gotcha, that makes sense. So these new regulations from the Department of Education are basically like, hey, we're expanding what sex discrimination means under Title IX.
Exactly.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as you can imagine, that sparked a whole lot of controversy.
Yeah.
Several states were like, hold on, we're not on board with this, and they decided to sue.
Oh, wow.
They claimed that the Department of Education was, overstepping its authority and that these new regulations just went against existing laws.
So it's like a legal showdown brewing.
Yeah,
Multiple states are pushing back
right.
against these Title IX regulations, and the whole thing lands right on the Supreme Court's doorstep.
Yep.
What happened next?
Okay, well, the Supreme Court issued what's called a per curiam opinion.
Per curiam.
Yeah, and you can kind of think of it like a group project where the whole court's contributing, but no single justice takes credit for it. It's a way for them to just kind of present this united front.
Okay, interesting. So it was a unanimous decision then. They just shut down those new regulations.
Well, it's actually a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
All 9 justices agreed on one thing. The states that were suing had a really strong case against 3 specific parts of the new rule.
3 specific parts. Okay, what were those?
All right, well, the most controversial one was the provision defining sex discrimination to include sexual orientation and gender identity.
Right.
I mean, that was a major point of contention.
There you go.
The second one was the part that prohibited schools from preventing individuals from accessing places like bathrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identity.
Okay.
And then the third one was the provision defining what counts as harassment based on a hostile environment.
Okay, so the court was basically saying, we're not so sure about these particular pieces of the new rule.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But here's the catch. They didn't toss out the entire rule. And that's where things get even more complex.
Yeah.
We have to kind of dive into this whole idea of severability.
Severability. Okay, what's that all about?
Okay, imagine a cake
Cake? I like cake.
with a few bad cherries in it.
Okay.
Severability is like asking, can we just take out those bad cherries and still enjoy the rest of the cake?
Mhm.
In this case, the big question was whether those 3 problematic provisions could be separated
Oh, okay.
from the rest of the new Title IX rule, letting the unchallenged parts go into effect.
Gotcha. So it's like, Okay, we'll toss these specific parts, but the rest of the rule is okay to stay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it. So that was the big debate. Now, both the district courts and the courts of appeals,
Right.
which handle these cases before they even get to the Supreme Court,
Uh-huh.
they decided against severing those provisions.
Interesting.
They basically said, nope, those three parts are way too intertwined with the rest of the rule. Trying to, separate them would just create a giant mess.
Oh, I see. Like trying to untangle a really, really...
Totally. Tight knot.
Yeah.
I can see how that'd be a nightmare for schools trying to figure out which parts of the rule they're actually supposed to follow.
Exactly. And the lower courts pointed out those logistical headaches, like trying to implement a rule that's been partially, chopped up.
Right.
Imagine trying to follow a recipe where some ingredients are forbidden.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad time.
It just wouldn't work.
So where did the Supreme Court ultimately land on all of this?
Well, in this instance, the Supreme Court sided with the lower courts.
Okay.
But here's the crucial point. This wasn't a final decision.
Oh.
Remember, this whole thing started because the Department of Education asked the Supreme Court to hit pause
Right.
on the injunctions, those orders from the lower courts blocking the new rule, while the appeals process played out.
So the Supreme Court basically said, we're not getting involved right now. Let the lower courts figure it out.
Precisely.
The Supreme Court acknowledged that this whole severability issue is super tricky, and they emphasized that they wanted the lower courts to expedite their review of the case.
Really get on it.
Yeah, they were like, get this figured out and do it quickly.
Interesting. So not a final decision, more like a stay tuned.
Right. But didn't you say there was a dissenting opinion?
Yeah.
Someone disagreed?
Yeah.
Yes. Justice Sotomayor, along with 3 other justices, they wrote what's called a partial dissent.
Okay.
She agreed that the injunctions were necessary, but she argued that they were way too broad.
Meaning?
It's like, she said it was like using a sledgehammer when all you need is a scalpel.
Wow.
She felt the injunctions were actually blocking parts of the new rule that had absolutely nothing to do with the issues raised by the states that were suing.
Oh, wow.
It was like throwing out perfectly good ingredients just because a couple cherries in the cake were bad.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you have any, specific examples?
Absolutely. One example is the rules requirement that for schools to provide reasonable accommodations for pregnant students.
Right.
Things like lactation spaces
Oh, yeah.
and extra breaks.
That makes sense.
These are clearly related to sex discrimination, but have nothing to do with gender identity, which was the main focus of those lawsuits.
So even though those parts weren't being challenged,
Right.
they were still blocked.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Justice Sotomayor argued that this was it was unfair
Right.
and totally unnecessary. She also pointed to the provisions that addressed questions about marital status or sex during job interviews. Again, these got swept up in the injunction, even though they weren't directly related to the issues at hand.
So she's basically saying they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly.
Right.
She emphasized that the injunctions should have been much more focused, like they should targeted only the specific provisions that were actually causing problems.
This is fascinating stuff. I'm starting to see how this seemingly simple case about Title IX is actually like a tangled web of legal arguments and all these competing perspectives.
And we're just getting started.
Oh, boy.
Before we move on, though, let's recap what this means practically speaking. What's the immediate impact of the Supreme Court's decision?
Yeah, let's break it down. So for now, those new Title IX regulations, including that expanded definition of sex discrimination, they're still on hold in those states that sued, right?
Yep.
The legal battle, it'll continue
It will.
in the Fifth and Sixth Circuit Courts of Appeals.
That's right.
And then, depending on what happens there, this whole thing could end up right back at the Supreme Court for a final showdown.
You got it. And remember, this wasn't a final ruling on the big, the overarching questions about the rule.
Right.
Just a pause in the action.
Gotcha.
But it's a pause with some serious consequences,
Yeah.
especially for schools that are trying to navigate this whole legal maze.
Absolutely. It's a huge deal for, everyone involved in education, students, teachers, administrators,
Everyone.
parents, everyone. So, what are the key takeaways here? What have we learned so far in this deep dive?
Well, I think we've seen how a seemingly simple question, like what does sex discrimination actually mean,
Right.
can lead to a really complex legal battle with some far-reaching implications.
Yeah.
We've also seen how the courts, even when they seem united, can really grapple with nuanced issues like severability.
Right.
And, we learned about Sotomayor's powerful dissent, which it kind of reminds us that legal decisions can sometimes have unintended consequences.
Wow, that's a lot to process, but you've done a fantastic job explaining it all. I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of what's at stake in this Title IX battle. But before we dive deeper, we need to take a quick break.
Stay tuned, because when we come back, we'll be exploring the human side of this whole debate. We'll hear from students, teachers, and experts about how these legal battles are actually playing out in real life.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were just unpacking all the legal twists and turns in this Title IX case.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating how a question that seems so straightforward,
Right.
like what exactly is sex discrimination, can lead to such a complex legal battle.
It really shows how the law has to constantly evolve to reflect the changing realities of our society.
Yeah.
And this case in particular, has some serious ripple effects,
Right.
impacting everything from school policies to the lives of individual students.
It really strikes me that this whole debate around Title IX boils down to this one fundamental question.
Yeah.
What does sex discrimination even mean in today's world? It's like we're trying to fit a 21st century puzzle piece into a law that was written, decades ago.
That's a great way to put it. And the Supreme Court, by sending it back to the lower courts, hasn't really given us a clear answer yet.
Right.
It's almost like they're saying, you guys figure it out for now.
Yeah.
Which, as you can imagine, leaves schools in kind of a tough spot.
Totally. So while the courts are trying to sort all of this out,
Right.
what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah.
What are the key things to watch as these cases move through the legal system?
One thing I'm really curious about is how these arguments around severability will actually develop. Remember, severability is, it's all about whether those three challenged provisions can be neatly separated from the rest of those new Title IX regulations.
Right, like separating the bad cherries from the cake.
Exactly.
So what happens if the lower courts decide that it is possible to sever them?
That's where things could get really interesting.
Oh.
You could end up with, parts of the new regulations going into effect in some states while other parts remain blocked.
Oh.
You could have this patchwork of different interpretations across the country.
That just sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It would definitely complicate things.
Yeah.
It could even lead to more lawsuits down the road.
Oh, great.
As different groups challenge these, varying interpretations. This whole situation just really highlights the need for clear and consistent guidance on such a sensitive and important issue.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if Congress might just eventually step in and, clarify Title IX.
Yeah.
Maybe they could update the law to just better reflect the complexities of gender identity and sexual orientation in today's world.
That's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
Although, given the current political climate, it's tough to say what kind of legislative action, if any, might actually come out of it.
Yeah, it feels like almost any change to Title IX would be incredibly controversial right now.
Oh, absolutely.
It's such a hot button issue that sparks such strong emotions on all sides.
Absolutely. This is a debate that really, touches on people's deeply held beliefs about, gender, equality, and even the role of government in our lives.
Right.
There are strong and valid arguments on all sides, and it's important to approach these conversations with empathy and a willingness to understand different perspectives.
I couldn't agree more. It's so easy to get caught up in the legal arguments and kind of forget that behind all the legalese, there are real people whose lives are being directly impacted by these decisions.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You can't lose sight of the human impact. Behind all those court rulings and all that legal jargon, there are students who are experiencing discrimination. There are teachers who are, grappling with how to create inclusive classrooms, and families who are just, struggling to navigate these really complex issues
that deserve to be heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, as this Title IX saga continues to unfold, it's crucial that we listen to those stories, that we engage with the diverse perspectives out there, and that we remember that this is about so much more than just legal arguments.
Right.
It's about people's lives.
Well said. I think it's important for us to kind of explore those diverse perspectives a little more.
Yeah.
We've talked about the legal aspects of the case, but what about the human side of the debate?
Right.
What are the arguments and concerns that are driving this intense controversy around Title IX?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's essential to understand the different viewpoints that are shaping this whole debate.
Right.
Remember those lawsuits that we discussed earlier?
Yeah.
The ones challenging those new Title IX regulations?
Uh-huh.
Well, those lawsuits weren't just about legal technicalities.
Okay.
They reflected some very real anxieties and concerns that people have about these changes.
Like what kinds of concerns? Can you give us some specific examples?
Absolutely. For some people, the main concern is student privacy and safety,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to, sex-segregated spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms.
Right.
They worry about the potential for like uncomfortable situations,
Nice.
or even abuse if transgender students are allowed to use facilities that align with their gender identity.
I can see how that would be a sensitive issue, especially when you're dealing with questions of, privacy and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
What other concerns have people raised?
Well, another major concern is fairness in athletics,
Right.
particularly in women's sports.
Yep.
Some people argue that allowing transgender girls to compete in girls' sports could create an uneven playing field,
Right.
given the potential biological differences, between transgender girls and cisgender girls.
Yeah, this is a topic that has generated a lot of heated debate.
It has, with
Yeah.
strong opinions on both sides.
Sure.
And it's important to acknowledge the complexity of this issue.
Yeah.
There are legitimate concerns about fairness
Right.
and ensuring that women's sports remain competitive,
Uh-huh.
while also recognizing the rights of transgender athletes to participate in sports that align with their gender identity.
It sounds like finding the right balance is crucial.
It is one that respects both the rights of transgender athletes and the integrity of women's sports.
Exactly.
It's a delicate balancing act, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
We need to have open and honest conversations about these issues. We need to listen to the perspectives of all the stakeholders involved,
Right.
and work towards solutions that are fair and inclusive for everyone.
Another angle that we haven't really touched on yet
Mm-hmm.
is this whole free speech aspect
Right.
of this debate.
Yeah.
I remember reading that some of the plaintiffs in those lawsuits argued that the new Title IX regulations could actually infringe on their First Amendment rights.
That's right. Their concern is that the regulation's definition of hostile environment harassment,
Right.
which is, essentially conduct that is so severe,
Yeah.
pervasive, or objectively offensive that it creates this hostile or abusive environment.
Right.
That definition is, it's too broad,
Okay.
and that it could potentially stifle open discussion on sensitive topics like gender and sexuality.
So they're worried that people might be afraid to express their views
Yeah.
or engage in debates about these issues for fear of being accused of harassment.
Exactly. They argue that this could create a chilling effect on campus where people self-censor to avoid, potential legal trouble.
I can see how that could be a concern, especially in an academic setting where open dialogue and the free exchange of ideas are so important.
It's definitely a valid point.
Yeah.
However, it's crucial to also consider the perspective of those who support these new regulations and their, broader definition of harassment. They argue that these protections are essential for creating a safe and inclusive learning environment for all students,
Right.
especially those who have historically been, marginalized and silenced.
So they see these regulations as kind of a necessary step
Yeah,
towards protecting vulnerable students from harassment and discrimination,
exactly.
even if it means potentially limiting some forms of speech that could, create a hostile environment.
Precisely. They argue that, freedom of speech doesn't give anyone the right to harass or discriminate against others,
All right.
and that schools have a responsibility to, create a learning environment where all students feel safe and respected.
It sounds like there's this real tension here between, the right to free speech and the right to be free from harassment and discrimination.
Absolutely.
How do we even strike the right balance between these competing interests?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a challenge that, courts,
Right.
lawmakers, and schools across the country are grappling with right now.
It seems like there are no easy answers when it comes to this issue.
It's tough.
Yeah. But it's clear that we need to be having these open and honest conversations about these, complex and often uncomfortable topics.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And, it's important to remember that behind all these legal arguments and these policy debates,
Right.
there are, real people whose lives are being deeply affected.
Yeah.
We need to approach these conversations with empathy,
Right.
with understanding, and a willingness to listen to different perspectives, even those we might disagree with.
You've done such a fantastic job breaking down the arguments on both sides of this debate.
Well, thank you.
I think it's clear that this is an issue with no easy answers.
Yep.
And the legal battle is far from over.
It's going to be a long road.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest takeaway is for our listeners so far? What's the one thing you really want them to understand about this whole complex issue?
I think the most important takeaway is that, this debate is not simply about legal technicalities or abstract principles.
Yeah.
It's about real people,
Right.
real students whose lives are being shaped by these decisions.
Yeah.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels safe,
Right.
respected, and valued,
Yeah.
regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation.
It's a powerful message, and it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping a more inclusive and equitable society.
We do.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to take a moment to explore what this all means for the future of education.
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
The outcome of these cases
Right.
could have a ripple effect across the entire educational landscape, shaping how schools address, issues of sex discrimination for years to come.
We've seen how passionate people are on both sides of this debate. It's clear that this issue really it strikes a deep chord in our society.
It does.
What's your take on what's fueling all this intensity?
I think it stems from this, this fundamental disagreement about the role of schools in our society.
Right.
Some people believe that that schools should primarily focus on academics,
Right.
on teaching students the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in the workforce.
Right.
They see issues of gender identity and sexual orientation as distractions from that core mission,
Right.
as topics that should be left to families to address.
And others believe that that schools have a much broader role.
Yes.
That they're not just about academics, but also about shaping values, fostering social and emotional growth, and preparing students to be responsible and engaged citizens in a diverse and complex world.
Exactly. They see issues like gender identity and sexual orientation as integral to that broader mission.
Right.
They believe that schools have a responsibility to create inclusive environments where all students feel safe and respected.
Yeah.
And where they can, they can learn about and celebrate the diversity of human experience.
It's interesting how this legal battle over Title IX is really a microcosm of a much larger debate about the role of schools in our society.
It really is. And this tension between these two viewpoints, schools as primarily academic institutions versus schools as places for social and emotional development,
Right.
is playing out in classrooms and courtrooms, across the country. And the decisions made in these Title IX cases will inevitably influence that ongoing debate.
Absolutely. How do you think this tension might play out in the years to come? What are your thoughts on the potential long-term impact of these legal battles on education?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think we'll continue to see challenges and debates over how to best address these issues of gender identity and sexual orientation in schools.
It seems likely that there will be more lawsuits,
Right.
more legislation,
Yeah.
and more passionate advocacy from both sides of this issue.
Absolutely. And, as society continues to evolve,
Right.
so too will our understanding of these issues. What might seem like a radical idea today could become commonplace tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, remember, not too long ago, same-sex marriage was illegal in many parts of the country.
Yeah.
Today, it's the law of the land.
Right.
So the legal landscape is constantly shifting, reflecting those societal changes and evolving interpretations.
Yeah.
This isn't a static issue. It's an ongoing conversation.
And that conversation is happening everywhere, in schools, in courtrooms,
Everywhere.
in living rooms,
Online.
Online. It's It's a conversation we all need to be a part of,
We do.
even if it's uncomfortable or challenging at times.
For sure.
Yeah.
The more we the more we engage in these conversations, the
Right.
more we listen to different perspectives,
Right.
the better equipped we'll be to create a future where all students,
Right.
regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation, feel safe,
Right.
respected,
Yeah.
and empowered to, reach their full potential.
That's a powerful vision for the future of education.
It is.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
what's your final thought for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to remember as they continue to grapple with this complex issue?
I think the most important thing to remember is that, this isn't just a legal battle.
Okay.
It's a human story.
Yeah.
It's a story about identity, about belonging, about, the fundamental right to be treated with dignity and respect.
Right.
And it's a story that, we're all writing together through our actions, our
Yeah.
words, and our choices.
Yeah.
What kind of story do we want to tell? What kind of world do we want to create?
Yeah.
Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves as we navigate these challenging and uncertain times.
Those are some profound questions, and I think they're the perfect ones to leave our listeners with as we move into the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive on the Title IX battle. It's been quite a journey so far.
It really has.
We've gone through those legal twists and turns, unpack those sometimes really complex rulings,
Right.
and even, we've heard some really passionate opinions about this whole situation.
Absolutely.
It's clear that this case has really, stirred up a lot of strong emotions.
It has. And amidst all those, legal complexities and all those heated debates,
Right.
it's important to remember that, this case is ultimately about people.
Exactly. Students, teachers, administrators, parents, they're all grappling with the real-world implications of these new regulations and those legal challenges surrounding them.
You're absolutely right. And that's why, it's so crucial to understand all the different perspectives that are at play here.
Right.
Remember those lawsuits that we talked about?
Yeah.
The ones that were challenging the new Title IX regulations.
Right.
Well, those lawsuits weren't just about legal arguments.
Right.
They reflected some very real concerns and anxieties that people have.
Like what kinds of concerns? Can you give us a sense of what some of those were?
Absolutely. For some, the main concern was student privacy and safety,
Okay.
particularly, in sex-segregated spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms.
Right. And I can see how that would be a really sensitive issue,
It is.
especially when you're dealing with these questions of gender identity. It's a topic that touches on, really deeply personal feelings and beliefs.
It does. And those concerns about privacy and safety, they were often intertwined with concerns about fairness in athletics.
Right. Particularly in women's sports.
Exactly.
We touched on that a little earlier.
We did.
Some people are worried that allowing transgender girls to compete in girls' sports
Yeah.
could create this uneven playing field.
Exactly. There are concerns about biological differences and whether those differences could actually give transgender girls an unfair advantage. And of course, this is a very complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
For sure.
It's not just about, fairness and competition.
Right.
It's also about the rights of transgender athletes to participate in sports that align with their gender identity.
Right. Finding that right balance, the one that respects the concerns of all involved. Yeah. That's a real challenge.
It is. And it's a challenge that schools and policymakers are actively wrestling with right now as they're trying to create these inclusive and equitable athletic programs.
Makes sense. But let's move beyond just athletics for a moment
Okay.
and consider another angle that's often raised in this debate.
Right.
This whole issue of free speech.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We talk about how some of the plaintiffs in those lawsuits argue that the new regulations could infringe on their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, exactly. They expressed concern that the regulations definition of hostile environment harassment was too broad and could potentially silence dissenting voices on these sensitive topics.
So they're worried that people might be hesitant to, express their views or engage in these open discussions about gender and sexuality for fear of, being accused of harassment.
Good concern, yeah.
And They argue that this could create like a chilling effect on campus,
Yeah.
where people self-censor to avoid potential legal repercussions.
Right, and it's interesting how this, this legal battle over title knives intersects with these broader societal debates about free speech, inclusivity, and the role of education.
It does. It highlights how challenging it can be to navigate these complex issues where, these deeply held values and beliefs often clash.
They do.
So we've got these two sides, both deeply passionate about their views,
Absolutely.
both raising important points. And it's clear that this isn't a simple black and white issue.
No.
There are shades of gray, nuances, and competing interests that make finding solutions really difficult.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that's why, it's so important to approach this whole debate with empathy.
Right.
And a willingness to listen to all those different perspectives out there. It's easy to get, caught up in the legal arguments or the political rhetoric, but we can't lose sight of the human impact.
Of course not.
Of these decisions.
Absolutely. Behind all those court rulings and all the policy debates, there are real people, real students.
Real people.
Whose lives are being deeply affected by these issues.
Yeah, their stories deserve to be heard.
They do.
And their experiences need to be considered.
Absolutely.
As we, as we try to create a more just and equitable society.
I couldn't agree more. This isn't just an abstract legal battle.
Yeah, it's not.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued for who they are.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into this Title IX battle, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with? What's the most important insight they should hold on to?
I think the most important takeaway is that this debate is far from over. This is an ongoing conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Yeah.
It's a conversation about our values, about our understanding of gender and equality, and about the kind of society we want to build for ourselves.
Right.
And, for future generations. It's a conversation that requires empathy, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with complexity.
For sure.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
That's fantastic advice. And remember, this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
It is.
There are so many other issues out there that demand our attention.
Yeah.
That require us to really dig deep, to challenge assumptions, and to strive for a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for that positive change. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of, the issues that matter most